field, in my work, it's a specialty. It's not easy to do beading, and not everyone can take to it. You could teach 10 people, and maybe you'll get one good beader out of it. But if you love it, and you love embroidery, then you have a chance of becoming a good beader. I'm a perfectionist when it comes to beading. It has to be perfect. And of course, when I taught, if I didn't like the stitches, take it out, no good. Take it out, no good. And the girls used to get so upset because they had learned to do the stitching, but they'd skip beads and stuff, and there's a method to it. I'm semi-retired at this point. I don't do it full time. But at least I'm able to visit my children because I have beading equipment in every house that I go to. I started my career in beading when I was 9 years old. My mother's sister, Aunt Jenny, used to take the work home, and I used to lay under her frame and look up at the beads and sequins going on to the garment, and I was mesmerized. And I asked her to teach me, and she said, "You're too little to learn this." And I said, "Oh, please, please, I love it." And she says, "If I teach you, you can't go out with the children. You know, if I'm going to teach you, you have to really be serious." And so I was, and she taught me, and the first week's pay was $3. From there, I got a job in the neighborhood beading shop, and I was the youngest one there, and they took me in. And then I graduated to a different place where they gave me $1 an hour. I got married, and I went into my own business. And I opened up a little shop, and I had all the neighborhood ladies working for me. I think, was the boss. You know, I always had to be bossy. From New York, I moved to California, and I worked on the beading with Helen Mahler and Nolan Miller. We went into our own business with a partner of mine, Stella Ruwada. We opened a little shop in Crossroads of the World on Sunset Boulevard. And the first week we got so many customers, we had to work night and day. We couldn't believe it. We were so in demand because we were very good beaders, I must say. We got clients like John Louis, who did all Loretta Young's gowns. And then Bob Mackie came along, and we did a lot of the movie stars. We did the Carol Burnett show, Cher show, Sonny and Cher, and many movies and many of the stars.
And that's why Bessie Nelson will keep beading and keep beating the pride of Cranford and the toast of Broadway. Schlesinger, CBS News on Broadway.
We did all Michael Jackson's with Bill Whitten. We created the glove. We must have made 6 gloves because he had to, wave and do all that. And then we made socks for him, and we did all his jackets. So then my husband passed away, and I didn't want to be in the business anymore. I moved to New Jersey with my family, and Ray Aguian called me, who was partners with Bob Mackie, and he said, "Bessie, dear, I have a job for you to do to help us out." And I said, no, Ray, I'm not doing it anymore. He says, but darling, you are the best. And that's all he had to say. And I said, all right, I'll do you this favor. And I did him the favor, and the rest is history. I was a beater in demand all over New York. This is Wicked. This is Macbeth. For theater, when I moved back to New York, William Ivy Long, who's the greatest designer. Oh, I worked so well with him. He started me. The first show I did was Guys and Dolls. I did the producers. Sunset Boulevard with Glenn Close. I think everybody you could mention we did some beading for. A costume designer has something in his mind and he usually makes a sketch. I work with him, I read the sketch, and I try to get what he's thinking in his mind to put it down with my beading. Like he may want feathers and he may want different colors, and I have to incorporate it and ombre them in, and I would most likely do samples to show the designer, and he would pick out what he liked. And lots of times I didn't like what they wanted, so I would be naughty and I'd do a little one of my own, and lo and behold, they would pick my sample. After I do my beading, I send it back to the shop where they build the costume and they make it up, and that's the final thing before it goes into the theater. And they have to build these dresses and gowns and costumes so well. That's why they say they build them, because they have to last on stage and they have to be worn day in and day out, and they have to hold up. And I have a reputation for my work to hold up very well, so that made me very happy. And I'm happy to say that in my whole career, I have never missed a deadline. I've worked night and day. I've worked where I didn't take my clothes off. I would go and work all night, jump on my bed in my workroom, get a couple of hours sleep, and then start all over again. I mean, that's show business. You have to love it, and you have to be on time, and production deadlines, you have to make sure you make them. The theater, they love to see sparkle, with the lighting and everything, the sparkle comes out, they're beautiful. But that's part of creating theater. I'm one little phase of it. With the costumes, I do the beading, the sparkle. But then there's the lighting directors, there's the scenery people. I mean, there is so much. And when you go to see a Broadway show, you sit there and enjoy all of our work, hard work. There's so many different things you can do with beading. It's so beautiful because you work with all different color beads and sequins and jewels and Swarovski jewels, and you sew them on, and it's an art. I loved it. It's my heartbeat. I love it so much that as old as I get, I will never stop till the last day.
In a show, everything that's on stage that is part of the set, props, curtains, masking, virtually everything except costumes under certain circumstances need to be flame retardant. Costumes do need to be treated when they're exposed to flame within 8 to 10 feet. The reason that it's important to make sure that everything is flame retardant is because these are very small enclosed spaces that are very high with a lot of draft. So fires can go from very small to very big very quickly. In Broadway, it's even more of concern because these are very, very old theaters. And even though they have fire curtains and over the stage, they have sprinklers installed over the last 20, 30 years. In the house, these are 100-year-old theaters almost, and there aren't any sprinklers there. So there's great, great concern. What everybody wants out of this process is the magic piece of paper that says things don't burn. Every time that we treat something, we keep them from burning. So I would say every show that we work on is kept from being a fire disaster, partly because of us. I think most people have no idea that this even exists or that it has to be done. People are always surprised when I tell them what I do. But production supervisors, props people, set people are normally familiar with this requirement, and for questions that they have or services that they need, they do come to us. To basically fund my artwork, I was working in technical theater as a stagehand technician, lighting, set, whatever I could do. And one of the things that kept coming up were that things needed to be treated and a certificate provided, that was in compliance with FDNY. I became familiar with those things and good at it, and after another interlude, I decided that I would start my own company doing this. And at that time, we were the only company that did only this. We started Turning Star in 1998. There were a lot of people that I would talk to and hear stories about that people would say, I got a violation from the fire department, I don't know what I should do. Or they go into a theater with a touring show and they're like, well, what do you mean we need the certificates? It's good in Iowa, why isn't it good here? And the thing is that fire code and fire rules are different from city to city and state to state. And I knew about those things, and it was interesting, and it was a way to help people. Since I started, the two things that have changed the most are that when I started, there were 5 fire codes across the country. Now there's 3, and 1 is in California, 1 is the rest of the country, and the last one is New York City, which has its own particular fire code since it was the first fire code in the country. And it's kept it updated, made revisions, improvements, and while New York City has adopted the national fire code, there are still some differences between the two. So it's knowing those kinds of things that I'm good at. The other thing that has changed is that I think there's more awareness of the need for this work to be done, and there are people that are more aware of it. There are still people that are completely unaware and they're blindsided and they're calling us and we're going in to do work at midnight. People as a whole are more safety conscious, and there are fewer people that are trying to just get by with things. The process of making something flame retardant is we get the material, whatever it is, if it's fabric or a wicker picnic basket that's being used as a prop in a show or artificial foliage, we get it. If it's something that we haven't seen before or we're not familiar with, then we'll do small-scale samples. We'll take a piece off, we'll treat it with, say, 3 or 4 different chemicals, then we'll try to burn it. And once we're really satisfied that we found the best chemical with the best application concentration, then we'll treat the entire thing. Adjust the flame. The types of things that can't be treated that are still flammable are really, from our point of view, broken into things that don't absorb any liquid because the flame retardants are a liquid and they need to absorb into the material so that they can be flame retardant. You know, things like plastic sheeting or a high density nylon, that's also very hard. Things that are laminated with glue. Glue is typically very flammable. There's a lot of different things to figure out about what gets treated with what different certificates get used for different things, and I like to solve puzzles. That's always the challenge and the exciting part of being presented with something new that we haven't done before and seeing the best way to do it.
When people ask me what I do, and I say I sell feathers, and they go, "What?" I say, "Hey, it's light work, you know? I enjoy it." I tell them that the simplistic version would be, we buy a bunch of feathers, we dye the feathers different colors, we sell them, and then we repeat that over and over again. And that's the simple version, but that's the truth. Well, the story began when my wife, who wasn't my wife yet, attended St. John's University. And in her classroom, she made friends with a lady who became engaged. You know, you see a ring on someone else's finger, you start to talk. My wife was engaged to me at the time, and they became friends. And it turns out that this lady was marrying a fellow named Anthony. Anthony became my best friend. Anthony's grandfather and father and brother were feather dyers. He had a feather business going, and he asked me to work for him. I had been a school teacher, but he kind of sucked me into the feather world. I don't regret it. The money was good, and of course it's always nice to work with friends. I worked with him for close to 30 years. I think it was probably around 1974, 75 it would have been, because our first project was to make a bicentennial feather pen. 1976 was coming, the 200th anniversary of our country. And I was peddling feather pens, so kind of door to door, store to store. And that's how I got started in the feather business, by selling feather pens. And then, of course, 1976 ended and the feather pen craze died out a bit. So I just started working with feathers in general. Working with rooster feathers, peacock feathers, quill feathers, ostrich feathers, and just sort of gravitated toward the business. I loved it. I left school teaching, and I loved school teaching, but I left it for this, although I do miss teaching. My first job with theater was for the Broadway show Sugar Babies, starring Mickey Rooney and Ann Miller, and among other things, they needed feather fans, which I had never made feather fans, but I made those. And then I remember, I think it was Barbara Matera Costumes. They had a sketch. They needed something to look like powder puffs. They wanted them made out of marabou feathers. And I was hooked. I loved theater after that.
Boy, I love that.
The way it was, as a fringe, not many people buy it that way. They would like it to be turned into what we call a feather boa, ready to wear. Singers like these, dancers like these. The thing that made me most excited about theater was the caliber and the brilliance. The people that I met, so like Barbara Matera and William Ivy Long, it was just a pleasure working with them because they knew exactly what they wanted. And if they showed me a sketch and I could do it, I would build what they wanted, or at least give them the feathers, the right feathers, that they could build what they wanted. The key things you need to know about feathers are the name of the feather, the qualities that are available, and the pricing, of course. And then you have to know your market. It wouldn't pay to stock up on turkey plumage in a color like orange. You'll only sell that around Halloween time. You learn as you go. We work with any decorative feather that's from a bird that's not an endangered species. These would be Chinese pheasants, This boa is made of ostrich. This is made of turkey marabou, ostrich again, marabou with glitter, turkey ruff. These are rooster, natural rooster feathers. These are dyed rooster feathers. And we also work with the common, peacock and turkey plumage and whatever they like. We have any feather that's other than bedding feathers. We don't stuff pillows. That's not our business. We handle feathers that are made to be seen, visual feathers. They're called fancy feathers in the industry. We sell them to all trades, being millinery, fly tie fishermen, theater, circuses, carnivals. When you do feathers for stage, everything has to be a little sturdier, a little more. They have to read a certain way from the balcony. So if you just put a single plume onto a costume, from far away, it doesn't quite look like a single plume. But if you make it a double plume, then even from far away, the density makes it read properly. And of course, you have to stitch it together in such a way that it will last for years, for 8 performances or 9 performances a week. Beautiful work, beautiful. This is going to be a sample that we will show to people who need to see what a double curled plume looks like. Usually when I work on a play or a musical, the costume designer will send some sketches to me or have one of their shoppers come over. The shopper sometimes has an idea of what the budget might be. The producer will tell them we only have X amount of dollars to spend, or spend like a sailor, whatever you like. And I will show them different feathers and give them the various prices, and they take that back to the designer. And if the designer likes what I've shown them, then they'll ask the producer if this is in the budget, I guess, and then they purchase it from me. The most important things to know when you're working with costumes and with theater people is you have to put your own ego aside, I think, and you have to see what does the designer really want, and you have to sort of get inside their head and try to make their dream fulfilled. So you want to help them realize their vision. And if you can do that, you'll do well with feather costuming, and it's a good life lesson in general also. Well, I pick the right feathers depending on what the sketch looks like. If they've drawn something that looks like this, they might draw something that's, it used to be egret, but you can't do egret anymore, it's against the law. So we imitate egret by burning some ostrich feathers. And we get as close as we can. It's a poor substitute, but it works, We have to send the feathers out to be dyed. We have several dyers whom we work with. The best one of them is retired now, so we had to use secondary dyers. But we've found some good people, both in the United States and offshore, that can match a color pretty well. There was a period of time when feathers were extremely popular. The feather dyer used to call that a Eugenie season, because there was a Princess Eugenia years ago who wore some feathers on her hat, and it was all over the news. And all of a sudden, every woman had to have similar feathers on her hat, whether it was marabou feathers, ostrich feathers. Feather dealers just couldn't keep up with the demand. At that time, there were probably 30 or 40 feather dealers in New York alone. And now we're down to just a few. But that was the Eugenie season time. Everyone made money in those days. Tourists will pay $200 to $600 a night to stay in a hotel in this section. So the landlords don't want to rent spaces to people like us when they can make a fortune making a hotel. The last 2 times Dersch Feather had to move. What went up in its place, and the building became a hotel. And hopefully it will end at some point, and we won't all be out of the garment district. One of my daughters, my youngest daughter, is going to come into the business in January and work with us for 1 year, and she'll see if she likes it or not. Because Jay and I, we intend to be here forever, but it won't happen, so we have to have someone else to take over eventually.